Hello, everyone. Hi. So my name is Jessica, and I'm a developer advocate with Launch Darkly, and I'm here today to talk to you about asking for help. This is by no means, I haven't completely mastered this, but I've looked into this and studied this and I've spoken to a lot of people. So hopefully we can all work together to talk about some good frameworks for asking for help. Now, picture this. You are 7 pages deep into your Google search. You've got anywhere from between 13 to 21 tabs open. You've visited the same mildly helpful page on Stack Overflow too many times. You are racking your brain for an answer that you're not even sure you'll find. And worse still, you're becoming code blind. You can't see the wood through the trees, and you are stuck on looking at this monolithic block of text that you can't quite decipher. You can't seem to understand the documentation, and all of the possible resolutions are bleeding into one. Has anyone been here? Okay, I've seen some recognition. Okay, thank you. I'm glad that this is not just me. I'm glad that this is a shared experience. You know, in a word, you are stuck. And when you're working on code, this happens all the time. There's a unique type of frustration that brews within you when the trajectory of your day is completely curtailed by a misspelled variable name or a stray curly bracket. It's a different kind of rage. Now, while it's relatively easy to become unstuck when you're working in a paired session or if you're mobbing around a problem, when you're on your own, you need to rely on your problem-solving skills, and that can often be really hard. Now that we've been all working remotely for about 2 years, and as of yet, we're still kind of trying to figure out whether or not, like, what the future of work looks like with regards to going back into the office full time. I know that some people have come back in full time. Let me know in the chat if you've come back in full time. I'm really curious to know. You're unlikely to get chatting about the problem that you're chewing over whilst you're making coffee in the kitchen. You know, we've all become far more intentional with our catch-ups and the way that we interact with each other. And fear not, this is not going to be, this presentation is not sponsored by WeWork. It's not sponsored by WeWork Kitchens, and it is not sponsored by Kitchens. Remote work has, in some ways, brought us all together. And it's also made work so much more accessible for some people than it's been in years. So we really need to come up with solutions that can work for our current state and our future configurations of work, no matter what that looks like. Now, depending on the makeup of your organization, how you're configured, the equity, the distribution of your team, you might find that you're consistently going to the same 1 to 3 people for help every single time. I know that that was true in my first dev job. It's easy for a few people to become siloed with both knowledge of the application, you know, like legacy tech skills, the framework that you're working with, the dependencies that you're employing here. If you're one of a few juniors on a team, it won't take long before the people that are your go-tos on problems quickly become inundated with requests for help. Just like in web development, you know, we've got requests on one side of the equation and responses on the other side. And we're in danger of burning out both participants here. You know, what happens when we have an excessive number of requests or responses? We're verging into DDoS territory. Well, I mean, this is oversimplification, of course, but it's not good. And even when people genuinely love supporting others, it can be difficult to come back to every single request that comes your way. I've seen so many messages like this on social media of people saying, if they're one in particular, someone was looking to funnel referrals in for a job, for an entry-level position that looked perfect for someone trying to start out in tech. And before she knew it, her DMs were completely overwhelmed with requests. And whether or not you're kind of giving advice on a role or offering time for a coffee, which a lot of the 100 devs participants at the moment have been doing, which is so brilliant to see, one request can quickly scale into 15, and before you know it, you are out of your depth. Now, you shouldn't take this as a sign to suffer in silence. You are valid, and you should feel empowered to ask for help when you need it. It's important to note here that you should never feel like you're asking too much from the get-go. You are not asking too much, but instead create space for someone to say no if they don't have the capacity to help you, which is totally okay. So try not to write yourself off in the first instance. And this can be really difficult because a lot of the time when people are asking for help, you'll see some people that lean very heavily into this side of things. I promise, I'm so sorry. I should have told people that they might be tagged in this next slide. You get some people that really identify with this and some people that really don't. So this is why it's really useful to have a framework when we're looking at scoping our requests. So how do you ask for help? Well, who knows about requirements here? Requirements, they are usually discussed at the product level, but we can easily use the framework of requirements engineering for small everyday problems. It's really useful, or I find it really useful anyway. Now, a requirement in isolation is a condition or a capability needed to solve a problem or achieve an objective. Now, requirements engineering as a term has been broken onto the scene around like 1997, evolving into a conference series, and that developed out into a standardized set of practices. The drawing up of requirements has now become a fundamental part of most life cycles and referenced heavily within both project and product development. In short, requirements engineering is the process of eliciting stakeholder needs and desires and developing them into agreed upon set of detailed requirements that can serve as a basis for all subsequent development activities. This is where you start from. Now, the purpose of requirements engineering methodologies is to make the problem that is being stated clear and complete, and to ensure that the solution is both correct, reasonable, and effective. Sounds so great in isolation, doesn't it? You're fine, this is easy, and this is the end of the talk. No, joking. As a rough definition, requirements engineering encapsulates several steps, which when combined make for the systematic and disciplined approach to the specification and management of these requirements with specific goals. So we're talking about achieving a consensus in the get-go, documenting what we're talking about, and then managing these requirements throughout the process of developing a solution. And of course, capturing stakeholder requirements. So that could be yours as the person requesting help or the person that you're speaking to. Capturing like what are their constraints that might minimize or risk the delivery of a system that does what we need. Now, there are entire lectures on requirements engineering that we can look up on YouTube, there are books written about this. What we really need here is to borrow from 4 key steps. So these are the elicitation. This is all about understanding the needs of the people that you're speaking to and conveying your needs accurately. When I use the word stakeholder, we'll get onto like what that means. I'm sure you've interacted with many stakeholders in your day-to-day job. But elicitation is where everything starts. Documentation, it's all about capturing everything discussed in a documented format will make sense. Now, clarity, like the completeness of the discussion is really key, but also accuracy are really important here. Those are the 3 things we really want to aim for. Validation. This is a step where we open up for the clear, continuous cycle of communication. So we can let the person that we're speaking to ask more questions about what's going on, and we can give them some feedback, and we can make sure that we're answering those. This is where we kind of establish our communications cadence. And lastly, management, the final state that involves managing any changes that might arise along the way. This must be done transparently and make sure that changes are tracked. So let's look at this in context. I'm going to take a quick sip of water. So let's say we've got this problem, a Babel runtime error. Now this excerpt is from a problem that's been viewed a few thousand times on Stack Overflow. It's got a really clear solution from a verified contributor, and we need to figure out who we're speaking to in this instance. So let's look at elicitation. Now, often when we're junior software developers or when we are working on up-leveling our software development career, our mentors are undefined. And by that, I mean, they don't even know that there are mentors half the time. It's quite common for us to see someone on social media and assume that they are the sum of their projected successes, as Amber said earlier on, and seek them out for help. But it's important to kind of define our stakeholders here and remember that we may feel like we know someone really well because we see them posting all the time, but we still need to be really intentional about how we start off our interaction with them. A thing to remember for asking for help from people that you don't know, which you should definitely do. It's a great way to kind of get to know people. Is that why they might want to help? This person has their own deadlines, their own life, their own pressures. They don't owe you a response and they don't owe you help at all, but they probably want to help, or there's a good chance that they might want to help. So the pandemic looks very different depending on where we are in the world. We need to be really considerate of other people's situations and just make sure that we're asking for help in a way that lets them know that it's okay if for whatever reason they can't help us at this point. Now, here's a quick example. I delved into a couple of accounts that I work on. Here's a quick example of what I personally think what not to do. Now, in the chat, what do you think is wrong with these approaches? Do you have any straightforward? They aren't very well formulated. Very vague, yes. No introduction, didn't even ask. Yeah, didn't even ask. That's like a personal, but not personalized to, yeah. They're just assuming that you're going to help. They don't introduce where they saw you. This is perfect, exactly. So often you'll see a truncated, redacted notification on your phone or that comes up at the top of your screen. It's not clear what they're asking. They're kind of going straight in. Yes, I love the confidence, but we just need to kind of reformat this a little bit. So when getting in touch with someone new to ask for help, it's important that you introduce yourself. Lead with why you're getting in touch, and then share a clear appreciation of their circumstances. And when I say this last point, okay, I'm someone who apologizes too much sometimes. You know, that was me in that SpongeBob photo earlier on. It's so easy to use this third one as a I'm so sorry for getting in touch. You don't need to apologize. No one's asking for an apology, but this is just the point at which you can show that you're not demanding something. This is a request and you appreciate anything that you're going to, any time that they're going to give you. Let's have a look at what this could look like in an example message. So we've got here, hello, we've been following each other for a while and I wondered whether or not I could introduce myself. Here's where I'd say, hi, my name's Jessica. I am banging my head against this problem, or I'm really struggling with this issue. It's for a work project or it's for a side project. And I think you might be able to help me. I'm currently studying TypeScript and I would love to get your advice on a problem that I'm struggling with. And completely appreciate that you might be busy or not have the time to discuss this. You can see my bad habit coming out here, but this is just, this is a point where it's really good to let someone know that you appreciate anything that they do give you. Just this is your kind of pre-thank you, if you will. Let me know if you'd be open to having a short conversation. You're scoping what you want from them, or help point me in the right direction. You're saying that you're kind of willing to do the work after they kind of get you off into a good start with regards to helping to find the answer. And by setting up the context for a conversation without outright asking, you notice here I haven't used one question mark. You're giving someone the opportunity to make an informed decision when it comes to helping you. This helps both of you understand whether or not you're a good fit for the type of discussion that you're interested in having. Now, more importantly, it prevents you from getting into the scenario where you're hinging all of your hope on someone's potential answer. We've all been there when we've messaged someone and been like, maybe they'll respond. We often love to think that our network might have the answers, but poorly scoped requests can at best open you up to a transactional relationship in the ideal scenario, but at worst, it can frustrate someone. It can put them off with working with you. It can get things off to a sour start, and that's not what we want. You are probably often assuming the obvious in your head and not not putting it out on paper. It's kind of like pair programming. You need to say, you need to show you're working. And this will be a key point at which you understand whether or not the request is too much for the person that you're working with. Now, here's a few good examples that I've encountered that loosely follow this formula that we've outlined. On the left, you've got a completely cold approach from someone who just jumped into the DMs and was like, hey, just want to get in touch. What I love about this is they say exactly what they're looking for and what they'd like to do. They let you know how you can access it. They give a little bit of detail about like what the mission is, and they have not anywhere, they've not asked a question here. So when I get this, I don't feel like, oh gosh, I really need to respond to this. And I will. Often it's I think it's a neuro-linguistic programming trait that often when you give someone an opportunity to say no, they'll subconsciously be really appreciative of that. And what exactly Sinead, yeah, you're giving someone an out so they can decline graciously, because they might not want to. No one wants to let anyone down here. I think in an ideal world we'd all want to help each other to the max of our capacity, but that's the thing, sometimes we are way closer to our max capacity than we realize, and that's when burnout happens. And on the right here, I've got a warm approach that came from a discussion. So here, she's able to ask the question really quickly. She's able to just ask, do you mind if I send you a link? Would you have time for a chat? She's stated how long she wants to talk for, what she wants to talk about. This is perfectly following the Calendly format. You know what you're getting into here. Now, let's move on to documentation, the second step. I promise I can get all of my words out. Let's say the people that you're working with, they've said yes, they're willing to help you, or you know them and they're like super, you're in communication all the time. They're like on your team, they're on your squad, and they're like, yeah, sure, what do you need help with? How do you scope the problem? So this is all about cognitive load. What we want to do here is we want to minimize cognitive load. And cognitive load, by definition, is the total amount of mental effort that is being used in your working memory. And there are 3 types of cognitive load. Now, first off, there's intrinsic. So that's like how a class is defined. That's relative to knowledge, to skill, and that's what you kind of bring as someone being asked for help to the scenario. There's extraneous. So that's relative to the efficiency of the task at hand. So like, how do you do the thing? Like, how do you go about solving this problem? Do you go down a YouTube hole and just hope for the best? No, you don't do that. But like, this is the methodology. And lastly, Jermaine, this is a tricky one to define, but this is more in relation to translating the learnings into long-term memory. So this is domain expertise. This is often about the vertical that you're in. Like maybe you're working in the financial, you're a software engineer in the financial sector and you're dealing with transactions. You need to be really specific, right, about whether or not you're defining something as an integer or a float, because that can mean different things in different languages. Your ideal problem will exert one of these types of cognitive load. So try to be really specific about which one that you're asking for or that you're looking to for help with. And does this match with their area of expertise? Are you going to someone about their domain knowledge, and do they have that domain knowledge? Again, this is like stuff that we can often assume, but it's really just good to kind of call out the obvious, right? Now, 3 aims in the documentation stage here. So first off, clearly and completely state the problem. Give context on the conditions of the error or the bug in question. Give the full error message. Make sure you outline exactly what's gone wrong with references in your development environment. Which versions you're using. Is this happening in staging? Is this happening in production? I hope it's not happening in production. If it is, it's okay. Urgency is key, and we'll get to that. The versions that you're running, and which line is the problem on, if you're like dealing with like a legacy app that you all have access to. Secondly, do your homework. Before you even go to this person, you need to have attempted what you're expecting from them. You can't ask from someone else. Sorry about that. You can't ask from someone else what you're not willing to do yourself, if that makes sense. It's not very well phrased, but hopefully you understand what I mean. Now, an associate software engineer that I spoke to recently, hey Yusuf, hope you're good, you rule. He says that he attempts to solve this issue for between 30 minutes to an hour. If he doesn't get to the bottom of the problem in that time, he starts constructing the request for help, citing what he's tried and where he's gotten to and how he's gotten to that information and what his kind of next approaches are. This is arguably one of the most important steps. Asking for help in a scoped way that demonstrates your understanding shows that you're improving as an engineer and that you're committed to your own progression. And often by engaging in the documentation stage and in the doing your homework stage, you're rubber ducking your scenario, right? You're looking at a blank piece of paper and you are writing down where you've gotten to with the problem. You're collating your knowledge and you're collating your methods. So you're kind of, you might find the solution in this bit, which hopefully you do. And lastly, detail your constraints. Now, in requirements engineering, the constraints are a key component of non-functional requirements. These can be time-bound, you need it now, system-specific, and they're potentially more critical than functional requirements, you know. State the urgency and importance of the task that you're working on and give the person a guide as to how to kind of handle your request. Make sure you accurately convey to them, you know, what you're looking for. This is a great step here to kind of give your recipient an indication of whether or not your request, whether or not they're the right person for the job and they're able to meet the requirements that you're looking for. You know, are they going to be able to get back to you in the time that you need them to? It's totally okay if they can't, but like this is the kind of the point that kind of qualifies your request. And if you're in an incident response role, your threshold for urgency will be different. That's another thing. Often our sense of urgency versus someone else's sense of urgency will not be shared. We need to really define that in clear, certain terms. Now, doing your homework is important. It helps you demonstrate your growth, and you know, your time is valuable, and so is the time of the person that you're requesting here. The top excerpt is from someone who loves helping people, but often finds that these requests can get a bit frustrating, and this is their bugbear with that. And the bottom excerpt here is the approach that I detail from that associate software engineer who's got a really good approach to problem solving. Cool, so you've documented your approach. What's next? Apart from taking a sip of water because you're dehydrated, it is validating. Now, step 3, validating. So this is where you're able to understand how many of your assumptions are correct, how much of the information you've documented is useful. And this is a part of the process where your partner will start to dig deeper. They'll interrogate your approach to problem solving and ask a few questions to help you get to the answer. Okay. So the level of engagement you gain during this stage will help you figure out how involved the person wants to be in your solution. Do they ask a lot of questions? Are they offering you a huddle, a pair, you know, a session? This is where they will offer the help. And if they don't offer it here, they're probably not going to help you. Use this as a chance to help point them in the right direction if you are the kind of person guiding someone else. And lastly, we need to manage the resolution of the resolution process. And that's taking the help that you've been given and be proactive with the next steps. This is a bit that I'm still learning. So I'm really sorry if you've interacted with me recently and I haven't done this, but you know, it's a journey. We're all getting better. You know, what are you going to do? You're going to take their suggestion, give it a try. Are you going to go to someone else? Do you need more help? Outline your next steps. And it's really good that as the person asking for help, if you close off the conversation, that really helps to maintain autonomy, authority in the situation and just show that you're being really respectful of the person's time. Remember that both of you are looking to become better from this process. You know, by teaching and helping others, we really have the opportunity to thoroughly get to know a subject. I remember hearing someone say once, when you teach someone, two people learn. Make sure that you take back the reins of the conversation once you've been offered help and demonstrate that you are on track for course correction. Now, as Navendu mentioned earlier on the session on like leveling up your career through open source, working in open source is a great way to level up your career. And let's have a look at kind of how this is done in open source. Open source is, where we find the blueprint for asynchronous conversation, asynchronous communication. So this right here, we've got this is the bug report that was the response to the Babel runtime error earlier on. And Babel is a free, just for anyone who doesn't know, is a free open source JavaScript transcompiler that's usually used to convert modern JavaScript, well, kind of ES6 JavaScript into backwards compatible versions that can be run by older engines. So first off, we've got a current behavior. We're using the format of the bug report as our elicitation stage because we're like one person. And next we're going to ensure kind of consistent results, we're showing our config file here. Then the input code, how are we calling our dependencies? What does our key file look like and how are we importing things? Next up, our terminal command. And then most importantly, our full error message, what we can expect to see. This helps people to kind of run through the scenario themselves. Lastly, we're single IC, so we need to kind of engage in the validation stage ourselves. So what's the expected behavior? What are the environment variables here? And this is a point where it's really important to kind of state the obvious. Are we using a monorepo? No. Are we using the CLI? You might say like, okay, we're using a CLI command over here. So it's obvious that we're using CLI, but like, you don't know if this is someone's first experience of open source. So you really need to kind of be open to kind of like spelling out the obvious for them. And then here's the current behavior. Oh, sorry. Sorry, here we go. Okay, environment, how you're using Babel, possible solution, and then your kind of next steps. So, and finally, we've got the possible solution. So here below the edit, there's a clearly stated note that Webpack actually prefers MJS files for ESM. The additional context section here helps us understand the IDEA usage, where to go next, and you're leaving the door open for this conversation to be ongoing. I'm going backwards. Okay, and last off, I'm going to finish up right now because I think I've got a couple of minutes left. If you are interested in the incident response side of things, one of my colleagues has recently put together this awesome diary of a first time on-call engineer, and this has got like some really good snippets in it about how to urgently ask for help, like what that feels like. So give that a shot if you are ever in, like, if you're kind of entering an on-call rota, that could be a really useful resource for you. I hope it is anyway. So TLDR, here are our points. We've got our 4 stages, we've got our framework, and you are not asking for too much. Well, you might be, but no, you're not. Make sure that you have the confidence to ask someone for help that you don't know. And just know that if they can help you, and if you scoped your request with consideration baked into the process, they'll be able to give you feedback. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the chance to speak. I love codebar. It's been one of the best organizations that I started my career with codebar, so this means a lot. So thank you so much for having me here.